Welcome to Sewing Anastasia, and today we are going to sew up a Cardi. This is a really fun, versatile piece all year for your wardrobe. It looks great out of just about any knit fabric. You can even make it out of a woven. And the pattern comes in sizes extra small through 6X. Two really nice features about the Cardi are that it has a really cool knit fold over facing, folds towards the front, not the back, and it has an option for pockets. This pattern is a PDF download, and you can get the large format copy to send to a printer, or you can use the home printer version where you can tape everything together and have your pattern right at home from your home printer. And to get the pattern, you can either get it from our website, or you can get it by joining our online sewing club. And if you're enjoying the Sewing Anastasia patterns, you definitely want to check out the online sewing club because you get a discount on the sewing patterns. And if you like what we're doing on the channel, make sure you like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel a lot. So because this pattern is a part of the online sewing club, the structure of this video is going to be a little different. We're going to go over preparing the pattern, and then we're going to go over some different pattern modifications so that way you can make this Cardi all your own style. After that, we'll go over how to sew it up, and then we'll check out the final products. So I really hope you enjoy sewing up this Cardi. Let's get started. The first thing you need to do to prepare your pattern is, well, print it out. And there's those two formats down below. There's either the large format copy that you can send to a print shop, or there's that one that you can print out on your home printer and tape together. And if you need help really printing your pattern, just make sure you check out that link down below for the video on how to do that and the details for it. And if your measurements are indicating that you're a few different sizes, bust and waist, make sure you check out the video above in the feed here of the school about how to grade your pattern, which means going from size to size. That'll be right at the top of your feed. Another important thing for this project is to pick out some fabric. Oh my gosh, the options here are endless, for real. Today, I'm using a pretty sturdy sweater knit. You can also use a ponte, you could use a sweatshirt fleece, you could use a jersey fabric. Now you better be careful with that one because those jerseys, they stretch a lot, but you can totally use it. You can make this out of a woven fabric as well. Just be really careful with your measurements because you want to make sure that it doesn't end up too small on you. But if you're looking for a recommendation, I definitely recommend a nice sturdy knit like that ponte, or take the knit and stretch it. You don't want it super stretching like a spandex, you just want a little bit of stretch to it. Today, I'm going to be sewing it up out of this sparkle boucle knit. I love it. I've had it sitting around forever, and this is the project for it. And you're not just going to need that fabric, you're also going to need some rib knit. So I'm using rib knit by the yard because there's pattern pieces for you to cut out in your rib knit. You could buy like the strips of rib knit off like Etsy or something like that. That works as well. Just make them the same length as your pattern when you cut those strips. So with the rib knit, it all has different stretch to it. We're going to go over how to work with this in the pattern, but you want something that has some decent stretch to it. You're also going to need just a little bit of lining fabric if you are doing a pocket on the front of it, because we have these really fun curved pockets, and there are 3 pocket options. So you can pick whatever pocket option you like. They're basically all the same sewing wise, just different shapes. I wanted to give you different options for pockets so that way you can find one that fits your style. You're also going to need some buttons. So the buttons I'm using are 3/4 of an inch big, but you could go real big, you could go real small, totally up to you. And if you're doing a standard cardigan length, you're going to need 3 buttons. Make it longer, you probably want more. Make it shorter, you probably want less. Now let's go over all the pieces you should have cut out to sew up this cardigan. You should have 1 back piece. You should have a back binding piece. You should have 2 front pieces for the cardigan. And then you should have 2 pocket pieces plus 2 lining pieces for your pocket. And then we move over here. We have 2 pieces of rib knit that are on fold for the front of the cardigan. We also have 2 sleeves here. We have 2 pieces of rib knit for the bottom of the sleeve and 3 buttons. So now you should have all of your pieces cut out and ready to go. In this pattern hack, we're going to go over how to shorten the cardigan. So if you want to wear it with like a skirt or high-waisted pants, and you can even make it shorter and kind of have a little bolero. And I'm also going to show you how to make it longer. Maybe you want to make a cardigan dress. It's so cute, right? Or maybe you just want to make a floor length and have a really nice cardigan duster. So the options there are endless for style and length. And I want to make sure you know how to lengthen it or shorten it properly. So let's dive in. First, I'm gonna go over how to shorten the pattern. The first thing I did was trace out another copy of the front of the cardigan that I can cut up. We'll work with the back next, but I'm gonna start with the front. So I'm going to be shortening this to my waist. So the first thing I need to do is find out where is my waist. And since we are all different heights, our waists are all different lengths from our shoulder. So I'm gonna have to measure myself. So we're measuring for the length here for the waist, the shorter version. So I'm gonna place the tape measure at the middle of my shoulder because that's where the pattern seam is. And then we're going to come down over the bust and we're gonna come to the waist. So wherever you want it, right around your waist. I wanna do my natural waist so I can wear it with some skirts and dresses. And then when I look at this, it's about 16, 17 inches. So let's measure that again, one more time. So it's about 17 inches from my shoulder down to my waist. Do this in a mirror so you can see it, because if you are bending down, you know what happens? The tape measure goes down as well. So make sure you're either holding it in place and then looking at it or looking in the mirror. So now we're gonna start working with the pattern and drawing some lines. So I've drawn in my seam allowance up here, which is 3/8 of an inch. And we are going to measure 17 inches down from the shoulder point there. So about mid-shoulder. And I'm gonna measure 17 inches down. So right there. Now what we're gonna do is draw a line across our paper here. So that there is my waistline. You might just think, easy peasy, I'm just gonna chop that line off. It's where my waist is. Well, we don't wanna completely lose the curve and the shape of this really fun cardigan. So we're gonna cut that line, but we're gonna move it up and redraw the curve. Let me show you how to do that. So I'm gonna cut out the waistline. And now I'm gonna take this piece and we're gonna place it right on top. So basically bottom of the cardigan we want here. So I'm just gonna bring this piece up so you can see it. And now what we need to do is reshape the front of it. So you can see if we wanna keep that cool curve coming in, how we're going to have to chop off some of this and then blend it to the center front up here. So I'm going to retrace this curve here at the bottom. And then we're done with that piece. And now what I want to do is reblend this front curve here. I think I'm going to do this in a few steps. See how that looks? That looks pretty good. Get rid of that little indent there. Connect these two. There we go. So now I have a new shape for the front of my cardigan. So originally you can see that we had that nice curve coming down to the bottom. And now we've got that nice curve coming down to the bottom of our cardigan for the shorter version. So now we can cut that new curved line there. Okay. So now this would be the new front for our cardigan, but we can't forget about our back. I've cut out a back pattern piece, so let's alter it to fit the front bodice for the cardigan. So I'm gonna take the front cardigan pattern and I'm gonna place it on top of the back. I'm gonna line it up at the underarm. Don't worry about lining up anything else. Armholes, shoulders, those aren't gonna line up. They shouldn't line up. And now I'm just going to put a little mark here at the bottom, the new hem. And we're gonna use our L square. We're gonna place it along center back, line it up with that little spot that we drew. So make sure everything stays nice and balanced. Draw a line across your paper. And now that is your new cut line. And if we take our front cardigan pattern and lay it next to it, these here should line up. So you can see now when we sew this together, they're going to line up nicely, and we've shortened the back to accommodate the front that we have shortened as well. You might think we're done, but there's one more thing we need to take into account. You want to find your front binding piece. So we need to make our front binding shorter because we have shortened the front of the cardigan. But how much shorter? Well, let me show you. So what you're gonna do is figure out how much did you cut off of your cardigan in the front. Mine was about 3 1/4. So that means I need to find my binding pattern. You can trace out another one, and you're gonna take off about 3 1/4 inches from one of the ends, just a rectangle. So it doesn't really matter which end, but I would probably take it off this end so you can leave where it says on fold, so you don't forget to put it on fold later. And this measurement here can vary with this binding. We're gonna really talk about the binding a lot when we get to sewing it, but all the bindings stretch differently, just to make your life extra fun while you're sewing. And I'm gonna show you how to deal with that later on. So for now, if you just take off that amount on the binding, you'll be in a good spot. And for your back binding, you don't have to change anything because our binding is just going across the hem. We don't have anything to worry about going up the side seam or center back or anything like that. So your back binding stays the same. It's just that front binding that you need to adjust. To lengthen this cardigan, we need to know where the waistline is, just like we did before for shortening it. So go ahead and draw that waistline on your pattern, just like we did before. Now you need to take one more measurement. We need to know how long do you want this cardigan from your waist. So I'm gonna measure from my natural waist down, and I would like mine to be 18 inches long from my waist. Now let's go apply this measurement to the pattern. So I have my waistline on the front bodice pattern like before, and this time I'm going to cut it. And essentially what we need to do is bring this down, and we are going to retape it. We want to be able to draw back in a nice curve, and we want to make sure that it doesn't end up over here or way over here because we need it to line up with the top here of the cardigan. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to scoot this paper down. I'm going to tape the top of the cardigan here down to the new paper. And now I'm going to use my ruler, and we're going to come straight down the side seam so that way I have a nice line to follow. Okay. Now what I want to do, since this is my waist, I want to find out where 18 inches is. So I'm going to find out where 18 inches, okay, right here, end of the ruler. Now that is going to be the bottom of my cardigan. So what we're going to do is take the other piece that we cut off. We can tape this one on as well, or we could just trace it. And we're gonna line it up right there with that spot. Okay, and now what we need to do is connect the bottom of the cardigan with the top of the cardigan and make a nice smooth shape here. So this here is all of the fabric that we're adding to the cardigan to make it 18 inches long from our waist. So I have my ruler squared up, and I want to draw a line straight down from the center front area here. So not down here where it's curving in, but up here at the biggest point. And so we're going to draw a line all the way down. It is not going to meet with that little piece down there. That's okay. It's not supposed to. So we want to keep that nice curved shape to the bottom of the cardigan here. So I'm going to line up my French curve with that shape and then blend it into the front here. Bring it up. And now we have a nice curve to the bottom of the cardigan, and we've extended it 18 inches, and it's just blending back up into the top. Now that we've completed the front pattern piece, it's time to move on to the back. Now when we're working on the back pattern piece, we're going to go over the same process we just went over with the front. We are going to cut at the waistline. I'm going to bring this pattern piece up and tape it down. I'm going to draw a straight line down from the side seam. And then we're going to measure from that cut line 18 inches at the side seam. And then we're going to take the bottom of our pattern piece and we can place that right there. We can tape it down or you can trace it out. Either way, I'm going to tape it down so you can really see what we're doing here. Okay. And now since the center back of this cardigan is straight, there's no curve to it, what we can do is take our long straight ruler. We can connect these two together and draw our new center back. And just like that, we have extended our back cardigan pattern 18 inches down from the waist. Now this is what your front and your back cardigan pieces should look like if you've made it longer. And again, we're going to need to adjust the binding. So because we made the cardigan longer in the front, that means we need to make our binding piece longer. Now, if you went floor length with that binding, you might actually need to put a few seams in it, so that way you can get the proper length of binding for your cardigan. So depending on the stretchiness of your binding, you're basically going to want to add a little less than 18 inches to the binding piece if you followed exactly what I did. So I would probably add like 17 inches just to account for a little extra stretch there in that binding. Now you've learned how to shorten and lengthen your cardigan pattern. In this pattern hack, I'm going to show you how to turn this cardigan into a vest, and I know y'all love vests. So the first thing into turning this into a vest is, well, not using the sleeve pattern at all. But it's not as simple as that. Let's go into what we have to do and what your options are. We're going to do this to both pattern pieces, but we're going to start working with the front. Now, when we have something that we sew a sleeve into, our shoulder length is generally to the tip of our shoulder. And I'm guessing you probably don't want your vest going all the way out to the tip of your shoulder. If you do, well then you're done. All you need to do, sew together your front and your back and you've got a vest. But I think you're gonna want to come in here so that way this isn't at the tip of our shoulder. So I'm gonna recommend coming in 1 inch. So use your ruler, come in 1 inch, put a line. And now I want you to use your French curve and I want you to blend this back into the underarm. And now that there is the line that we are going to cut away to give us some more room in here and just so it comes in on the body a little bit more. So let's cut this away and move on to the back pattern piece. Now essentially we are going to do the same thing. We're going to come in 1 inch on the shoulder there. We are going to use our French curve and we are going to redraw that armhole. That looks pretty nice and smooth to me. And now we're going to cut off that extra. There we go. Now we'll have a little bit of a nicer, more open armhole for the vest design. No matter what you do, you want to take it in the same amount at the tip of the shoulder here because we want these shoulder seams to line up. If they don't line up, well, they're not going to sew together very well. So just make sure you do the same amount. Now let's talk about how do you sew and finish this? Well, it's going to be the same as the cardigan, especially if you're using knit fabric with the binding. You can do the binding around the armholes, or you could do a bias facing around the armhole. You can even fully line it. Cut out one in lining and then one in your self fabric, right sides together, leave a little opening, essentially like a pillowcase, right? And then just close up that little opening in the lining. It could be that easy. You can even use this pattern for a woven fabric. Let's say like a quilted cotton or something like that, and then just use a regular bias tape around the edge that you're flipping to the outside for that really fun detail. So you have a lot of options here for the vest. And this is how you can take the cardigan pattern and turn it into a vest pattern, just like that. You can even combine these two pattern hacks. So you can basically have a really long vest or a cropped vest, totally up to you and how you envision wearing this in your wardrobe. Now it's time to start sewing, and our first step is going to be sewing together the shoulders. Now, when we're working with this cardigan, you can serge the seams together, which I'm going to be doing today, or you can actually use your home sewing machine. Just make sure you're using your lightning bolt stitch or the knit stitch on your machine, especially if your fabric has a little bit of stretch to it. So you can definitely do this on either your serger or your regular sewing machine. I'm going to be demoing it on the serger today, and then I will be using the regular sewing machine later on when we attach the binding down. Our first step is going to be sewing the shoulder seams together on both sides. So right sides together, line it up, and we're just going to sew from end to end. So I'm going to be serging these seams together. Now the shoulders are complete. Let's take a look at the shoulder seams. So you can see how the shoulder seams really brought the shape of this neck together. And if we flip it back, we've got that nice seam there. Now that the shoulders are together, it is time to sew in the top of that sleeve. And there is a notch there to mark. Before we clip in the sleeve, we need to make sure we mark the notch. So mark the notch on the wrong side here of the fabric, and the bigger side of the sleeve here is the back. It'll also say back sleeve here on the patterns. We need to make sure that one is going to be inset into the back of the armhole. So this will be the front, we have the notch, and then this is gonna go into the back. Now we're gonna clip it together. If you're using a sewing machine, you can go ahead and pin it together. Remember, no pins in your serger. You don't wanna ruin your serger. And then with these knit sleeves, you know, you can give them a little pull sometimes. You gotta ease them in, depends on how sturdy or stretchy your knit is. It all moves differently when it gets those curves cut into it. Think about that inward curve stretching more than that outward curve on this part of the sleeve. So sometimes if you've got a real light knit, that inward curve is gonna stretch out, so you're just gonna have to ease it into the sleeve. And when I say ease it, I just mean you're essentially going to stretch it into place. And then your sleeve here should be clipped in, and now we're just gonna serge from end to end. And everything I'm doing to this sleeve, we're gonna do the exact same thing to the other one. So now I'm gonna serge the top of that sleeve on. Remember, you can use your sewing machine as well. Now we're done with the top of the sleeve. I also sewed in the other sleeve. Let's take a look at it and go over our next step. So you can see we have the sleeves here sewn into the armhole, creating a nice shape for our shoulder. And then what we need to do is take the front, fold it to the back, so that way we can line up the underarm. And we are going to clip the underarm seam together. And if your fabric's really bulky, you can take one seam allowance and push it down and the other seam allowance and push it up. Line up the bottom. Line up the bottom of the sleeve. And now when we sew it together, we're gonna go from end to end, keeping it straight, even though it naturally has a cornered curve to it. And you're gonna follow this process for both sleeves. So I'm starting at the end of the sleeve, and I'm just gonna work my way all the way down to the other end. And now we're finished with that step. Now that we have both sleeves in, our cardigan is really starting to look like a cardigan. Let's check it out. So now we essentially have the shell of the cardigan finished. We've got our sleeves, our fronts, our backs. But now it's all about the details and the finishing touches to bring this together. Let's start by sewing the rib knit cuffs onto the bottom of the sleeves. To start sewing our rib knit cuffs, we want to take the rib knit and you want to fold it stretchy side to stretchy side. Make sure you don't sew it backwards. We're essentially going to create a tube. So we're going to serge or sew this side together, and then we're going to fold the tube down, wrong sides together, and then we're going to get this tube that we have onto the end of our sleeve. So I'm just gonna go ahead and sew this side up here. And again, whatever you're doing to this sleeve, you're gonna do the exact same thing for the other one. So I just sewed up that side real quick. Now what we're gonna do is take the cuff, and we're gonna fold it wrong sides together. Ooh, look, my stripes even match up. And we're gonna line up these edges. Make sure you line up the seams as well. So now essentially we wanna sew this edge to that edge and line up the seam. So we're going to take the cuff and we're going to line up all the raw edges here. And we're gonna also line up all the seams. So I always start by clipping the seam, and then we gotta make sure we stretch it out and clip it, and then we're gonna serge it together. So I'm gonna clip at that seam first. I'm gonna give it a nice even pull, and I'm gonna clip right across from it. And then just pull in between the clips, make sure everything is going to sew up real nice and even. Essentially what I'm doing is quartering it. If you guys need help quartering, I'll put a link to a video down below. So now we're gonna serge it together, all 3 layers. And notice how this is bunching up in here. That's supposed to happen. The rib knit is smaller than the opening of the sleeve. When we serge this, we are gonna stretch it and serge it together, and then it's gonna come back for a nice rib knit cuff. So when you're serging or sewing in a circle, always make sure you put your fabric in so it's parallel with the foot when you start. Remove any clips in the way and make sure all 3 layers stay nice and lined up. Remember, you got to stretch it while you serge it. We're going to overlap the serge, and then we're going to serge off. Now we're done. Now that we have the cuffs on, let's check them out. So on the outside, they have a nice finish like that, a nice seam. And then on the inside, they have that seam there serged together. And we've got that nice seam here on the rib knit lining up with the underarm seam on the sleeve of the cardigan. Now it's time to add the binding around the rest of the cardigan. Now you should have 3 pieces of rib knit cut out for this cardigan, 1 for the back and then 2 for the front. And we're going to have a seam up here at the center back of the neck. So that's why there's 2 long pieces for the front and they're going to meet at the back. Now we need to attach all the rib knit together. So we're going to take the long pieces and we're going to attach 1 at each end of this short piece here. And then once those are attached to the bottom piece, we're going to sew together these really long pieces here. So that way that's going to be the seam at center back. So I'm going to be using my lightning bolt knit stitch to sew these together. Since I have black in my serger right now, I want to use white thread, but you could totally serge this seam together as well. You can also use a straight stitch technically because the stretch is going the opposite direction of the stitch. So now we have that center back there sewn together and we're going to do the other 2 sides. Now you should have a giant circle of rib knit. Now it's time to attach it to the cardigan. So now it's time to clip the binding to the cardigan. We want to fold the binding wrong sides together. And I'm going to start at the side seam. And you're going to notice that I'm pinning it to the wrong side, should I say clipping to the wrong side of the cardigan. Because when we're sewing this, we want it to essentially flip up to the outside of the cardigan and have a nice clean seam on the inside. So we're sewing binding, right side of binding to wrong side of cardigan. This is very important for this to work out properly. So now that I have 1 side seam here in the back clipped, I'm going to come over here and clip the other one. And you're going to notice that my binding is shorter than the back panel piece, and it is supposed to be because we have a lot of stretch in the rib knit, and we just want to stretch it out to fit there. It's going to give us a much nicer fit when we flip it with the rib knit here. So I always like to clip the other end, and then I'll work out my stretch in between. So now if I just give it a little pull, we can see exactly how much we need to stretch it. I'm going to clip it in the middle. And then I'll clip in between those 2. So just a few clips to help us while we're serging. Once you start to feel real comfortable about working with your rib knits, you can skip all the clipping and just go for it on the serger. And if you don't have a serger, you can pin this right now and sew this with your stretch stitch on your regular sewing machine. Now what I want you to do is find the center back on your neck piece here. So fold the 2 shoulder seams together and then go ahead and put a pin in that spot, or you can put a little mark of chalk there. We want to know right where center back is on the neck because we are going to line up that seam on our rib knit with that point. So we get a nice even stretch if we go ahead and mark and clip this point first. And now I know I need to get this rib knit to fit evenly from center back neck all the way down to the side seam. And we're going to need to do that on both sides. So I'm going to clip these together real quick. Now we're all clipped and it's time to serge this all around in a circle. So I have my binding with the sweater here in the serger, and I'm going to be serging together all 3 layers. And while you're doing this, really pay attention to all the layers and make sure they're being caught by the serge stitch. You get back to where you started, overlap your serge, and serge off. Now the binding is all serged on. You can see it's facing the inside. So what we want to do now is flip it back, and we're going to understitch the seam allowance to the wrong side of the sweater. And I've got some options here for you on this step. Now, depending on the material you're using and the sewing machine you have 3 options for this. You can straight stitch it, you can broken zigzag it, you can zigzag it, or you can use the lightning bolt stretch stitch on your sewing machine. And I've sewn it up all 3 ways, so I'm going to show you how it can look different. So this fabric here is a sweatshirt fleece, and I've used a straight stitch to understitch the binding here. And you can see that worked well. There's no stretching, there's no pulling there. And you'll see it still allows it to stretch just a little bit too, and that's all we need for this cardigan. And you're only going to be able to put this straight stitch in here if you have a sturdy knit. So for this one, I've used the lightning bolt stretch stitch on the sewing machine. Still gives it a little stretch, no popping. And I know it's hard to see, but we've got this little lightning bolt stitch right here in the edge, holding under the seam. And on this one here, I've used a really long broken zigzag stitch. So you can see the zigzag forming, and it's really long, and this allows this to stretch. Look how much stretch is in this. This is just a jersey fabric with a really stretchy rib knit, and that broken zigzag is working wonderful. So a straight stitch would not work great on this fabric because it's so stretchy. It would just pop and fall apart. So if you have a really stretchy fabric, make sure you are using one of those stretch stitches. And if you are lucky enough to have a 5-thread serger, you could also use the chain stitch for this step. So today with my fabric, it's kind of got a medium body to it with a little bit of stretch. I'm going to be using the broken zigzag on my regular sewing machine. And as always, test these stitches out on scrap pieces of fabric, so that way you don't have to be seam ripping your actual project. It's always great to test out the stitch length, the stitch width, and with knit fabric, if you have something really thick, you're gonna want less pressure on your foot. So I have my 3-step broken zigzag selected, and now I'm going to change the settings. I'm going to be making my stitch narrower since I need it at the edge, and I'm also going to make it a little longer. So I'm going to play with this till it looks about right for me. I think that looks about right. So you can see it's still a broken zigzag. It's still going to have some stretch, but it's not like a super pointy zigzag from right to left. I'm also going to make my foot pressure less. So if you do have an epic, you're going to push this little button here next to the thread tension. Now a foot pops up, and this is the foot pressure. And I'm gonna go down to 4.5. In your machine, you might find this foot pressure knob or button or lever somewhere else. Just make sure you find your foot pressure and make it less. So I'm stitching on the wrong side of the cardigan, and I have this seam allowance pushed over to the left. And we're gonna stitch that seam allowance down to the wrong side of the cardigan. Make sure you're not stretching your cardigan as you're sewing, just guide it through. If you feel like it's not moving right, you can always adjust the pressure of your foot, your stitch length. You should really be figuring this out on a test piece of fabric first. You'll see I keep lifting it up just to push that seam allowance under to make sure I'm catching it. So I'm going to overlap a few stitches and then add my back stitches. And now we are done with that understitch. So now all of my understitching is done. You see that little zigzag there, barely in this black, but it is there, holding down the binding and forcing it to the outside. So now we have one more stitch to hold this binding up. So what we're going to do is just fold it right at the seam there, and we're going to pin it down. And we're going to be using a sewing machine for this, so that's why I'm using pins. And you can see what a nice, clean, finished edge this technique gives the inside of the cardigan and the outside. So I'm going to go ahead and pin this all the way around. Now I have the binding all flipped to the outside of the cardigan, and I'm going to be using a little zigzag to stitch this down. Again, you can use broken zigzag, regular zigzag, straight stitch, chain stitch. You have options for this. Just test it out first on a scrap. And this is going to keep the binding permanently turned to the outside. So we have this really nice rib knit on the outside and then a super clean finish on the inside. So I have my broken zigzag set up and I have changed my thread color to match the binding better, but I left in my black in the bobbin so that way you're not really going to notice that stitch on the other side. So you can always put in a different color bobbin than your top thread. I'm going to add a little fix here. And we're going to work our way all the way around this cardigan. When you get back to where you started, you can add a few back stitches or use your fix button if you have it. Now let's take a look at it. Look at how nice this binding just flips to the outside. And I tried to get that matching thread, so it looks really nice right in that red there. You know what, you could also hand stitch this down if you like to, but I think using the sewing machine is just so much more efficient. We are almost finished. Next, I'm going to be adding pockets to the cardigan. Now, if you're not adding pockets, well, just skip on to the next step of adding buttonholes and buttons. And I've got some great tips for sewing buttonholes in knit fabric. So for your pockets, you have a few options. I'm going to be sewing up this patch pocket, which follows the curve of the design. You can see I have it cut out in matching fabric, so it blends right in. Now, the other options you have are this curved pointed patch pocket, which is super fun. Or you can even do this pop-up curved pocket. So you could leave it flat, but it was intended so that way when you sew it, you put some space in the middle of it and then you stitch around the outside, giving it a nice bubble domed shape, very 50s. To finish the edges of these pockets, we're going to be lining these pockets. So fancy, right? So take the right side of your lining and place it on the right side of your fabric. And the first thing I want you to do is sew together the top of the pocket with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you can pin these together. I'm going to be using the sewing machine for this. You could also use the serger. Just remember, always double check your settings on some scraps first. So I have my straight stitch on and I'm creating a 1/4 inch seam. You can see that worked really well, and since we're sewing a woven to a knit, you can use a straight stitch. So now we're gonna flip the lining out and we're gonna add a little understitch on the lining side, making sure that our seam allowance is pushed over to the right towards the lining. And don't forget, your understitch distance from the seam is 1/8 of an inch or closer. And now that stitch beautifully holds the lining down. Now we're going to take the lining and we're going to flip it to the right side of the pocket and make sure that the pocket is folding at the seam and not the understitch. This whole little 1/4 inch seam is flipping towards the lining piece. I'm going to put some pins in it, keep it together. And what we're going to do too is leave about 1.5 to 2 inch opening here on the straight side. And then on the curved side of the pocket, we're going to sew that whole curve together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance as well. And again, at the top here, just make sure it's folding down that 1/4 inch seam. Now that I've got that all pinned together, we're gonna sew it together. Just using a straight stitch, I'm gonna make sure I'm back stitching at the beginning and just work my way around this curve. You get to your corner, leave your needle and lift up your foot and turn. And then sew up about 1.5 inches, leave my needle and lift up my foot and turn to come off the fabric. So this is going to be where I'm leaving my opening. So your little right angle looks like that. And now I'm gonna come down about 1.5 inches. We're gonna come onto the fabric 1/4 inch. You are gonna add a little back stitch. Needle in, foot up and turn. And now we're gonna sew up the rest of the side. Add a back stitch and let's take it out. Now that our pocket is fully lined here, we're going to clip off our corners and then flip it through that little opening we left. So I'm just gonna clip off that extra little bit in the corner there, so that way it flips that much nicer. And then same thing with that corner here. And now we can find that opening and just push out the pocket through that opening. And then after you fully get it pushed out, I want you to give it a nice press. And then you're gonna see how nice this understitch looks here too. Really push out your corners. If you can't get your corner out, you take a pin and like push it up. You can get a tool called a pusher or some sort of little pushing device. There's lots of them there on the market, so you can see what a difference pushing out that corner makes. Now that it's all pressed, it looks so nice. Let's take a look at that understitch too. Look at that understitch at the top of the pocket. So it really helps pull and fold that lining piece in around the top. Now we're gonna position the pocket wherever you'd like it. I would like to keep it maybe like 1/8 of an inch away from my rib knit there. I'm going to pin this down. It should match the curve of your jacket. You can see that hole there. We're gonna end up sewing over that when we top stitch it down. So I'm just going to put some pins through that. And we wanna make sure that you're leaving the top open. If you wanna pin it, you can put a pin here, but we're not sewing the top down because we gotta get into our pocket. So now we're going to sew down the straight side and around the curve. Now you could add just a top stitch. You could do an edge stitch and a top stitch. It's going to really depend on your fabric, how open of a weave is it, etc. I'm going to be adding just a top stitch since I have a pretty bulky fabric here. I'm going to be using a straight stitch, and I'm going to be sewing 1/4 inch away from the edge, and I'm gonna use a stitch length of 3.5. And if your fabric's super stretchy, you're probably gonna wanna use a lightning bolt or a small zigzag to put this pocket on. I'm going to be using my 1/4 inch foot just to make sure I get a super precise 1/4 inch. And again, I'm using a straight stitch, but you could be using a zigzag or that lightning bolt stitch, and you cannot use those stitches with that foot. So just be aware of that. This one just has one little opening for a straight stitch. Make sure you're adding a back stitch at the top of that pocket. Maybe even go over it a couple times and really reinforce it. It's gonna get a lot of pull and wear up there. I finished both pockets. Let's take a look at them. So you can see I have the top stitch on the pocket, and then we've got a nice pocket here to hold our goodies. And it's fully lined. Super nice patch pocket here. Now it's time to add the buttonholes to the front and the buttons. I'm going to be adding 3 buttons down the front of my cardigan. And you could also do no buttons and just do like a nice little sweater clip in the front. So I picked out these gold and white buttons that I think match great. Now when you're putting these on the cardigan, I would try it on and find out where your bust is. So we want the biggest pull on the shirt, on the cardigan, to get a button there in the middle so we don't have gapping. And then I'm going to suggest that you put one 2 inches above and below that. So I've measured these out and I've marked them with my water-soluble pen here for fabric. Now you could also add a few more. Maybe you just want one in the middle. Maybe you just want one on the top. 3 is my suggestion, but obviously go with what your gut's telling you, fashion-wise. So I have my buttonhole placement marked with chalk, and now we need to interface this. Otherwise, our buttonholes are gonna stretch out, they're gonna get jammed up in the machine, it's gonna be a nightmare. So I'm gonna suggest that you use a tearaway interfacing for the back. You could also use a water soluble. And then I'm also gonna take a piece and place it over the front. Now I know we already marked out our buttonholes. I can see through this. So first I'm going to pin everything together. I wanna pin these layers together just so it doesn't move on me. Beginning, middle, and end. You can put as many pins as you want. You could even do a basting stitch in here if you wanted. Okay, so I can see my chalk through here, so I'm just going to remark the placement. Let's move that down. Remark the placement of my buttonholes here. There we go. Now we can add the buttonholes to the front. I'm going to be using an oval buttonhole. It's basically round on the ends. It's used a lot in blouses and tops. So since we're making a cardigan, I thought we would use it today. Now, if your sewing machine doesn't have this, you can just use a regular rectangle buttonhole. So this is what the buttonhole looks like that I'm going to be creating. You can see it's a long, narrow oval. So all sewing machines sew buttonholes a little differently. So however yours performs buttonholes, go ahead and add them to your cardigan. One done and two to go. Our buttonholes are finished. Let me show you how this tearaway interfacing works if you haven't used before. And then all we need to do is sew on our buttons and try it on. So I love the tearaway interfacing. We are literally just going to tear it away. It pops right off. You can see we got our buttonholes there looking great. And then on the other side, we also just tear that off. And then I'm just gonna open up my buttonhole with a little razor blade so we can get our button in there. And to open the buttonholes, I like to just use a razor blade and go right through the middle here. It's gonna give you a nice, clean opening. And there we go. Now we have our buttonhole in our knit fabric. It's still nice and sturdy. It didn't stretch out around it. So I'm just gonna hand stitch these buttons on real quick where I have the buttonholes, and then we get to try it on. And if you need some help stitching on a button, make sure you check out my video on YouTube about that. I'll put a link down below in the curriculum. Our cardigan is finished. Let's take a look at it. And then once we go over the details, I'll try it on. So throughout the process of creating this, we added this beautiful binding with this really fun finishing technique. We have our beautiful patch pockets, which are fully lined. We have our buttons, our buttonholes, the binding that comes all the way up to the back of the cardigan. And then we also have matching rib knit cuffs on the sleeves that matches the binding around the cardigan. And it looks great on. Check it out. We have this nice fitted cardigan. We've got our patch pockets. We've got our buttons down the front, and we have the really fun rib knit finishing off all the edges. And I know my favorite sewing technique on this is taking the binding and flipping it to the outside. So it gives the inside this beautiful finished edge. And we've got that binding in the back of the cardigan as well. And this fit is nice and relaxed, not super tight and not super oversized. But if you wanted to make it really fitted, you could always take it in on the sides, give it some little tailoring. Or if you want it really oversized, you could always go up a few sizes when you're cutting it out. As a little fun extra bonus, I wanted to show you this vintage early 60s, late 50s cardigan that was my aunt's, and it is all wool and it has all this gorgeous glass beading all over it. So this could be an inspiration for adding some hand beading or embroidery or machine embroidery to a cardigan that you were creating. I also wanted to show you that it is fully lined and it is hand stitched in. So if you have a really stretchy knit, or maybe you're upcycling one of these sweaters, you can add a lining to it. You're just gonna wanna hand stitch it in so that way you don't have any visible stitching on the outside. And then a really fun feature that they also added was some grosgrain ribbon to the front. Now the grosgrain ribbon on here works for that reinforcement because it's just a straight line. We're not gonna wanna use grosgrain ribbon going around the curves of this cardigan, but if you do straighten out the pattern, you can use that grosgrain ribbon at center front where your buttons and buttonholes are going to be. Thank you so much for joining me in this month's pattern of the month, the cardigan. If you have any questions, you can leave it right down below here, or you can hop on over to the Discord and find the channel for the cardigan and leave your questions, comments, maybe you need help picking out fabric or buttons. We would love to help you with that over there. There are so many members over there right now and everybody's got an opinion waiting to weigh in. And it's a super friendly, all-inclusive community, so don't be afraid to join in. And don't forget, you can hack this pattern. It's more than just one pattern. You can turn it into a dress, you can turn it into a super cropped cardigan, or you can make it into a vest. That's right. I can't wait to see what you guys do with this pattern. And don't forget, you can use so many different fabric options for this. It is really endless. If you have any questions about those fabric options, hop on over to the Discord or leave it down below. Thank you so much for watching Sew Anastasia today. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. I'll get back with you as soon as I can. And don't forget, this pattern is a part of our online sewing club, so make sure you check that out because you do get discounts on the patterns over there. If you enjoyed the video today, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you know when all the other videos come out. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for watching today. These videos are for you guys. And don't forget, if you want to know what's going on in the studio or what Iris is up to, make sure you check out our Instagram stories. Thank you so much for watching today. Bye!